Well, for more on this story, I'm joined by our chief foreign editor, Rob Parsons, who's here in the studio. Rob, just why are these Saturday's developments so important?
Well, it is a massive project. I mean, that's essentially it. This is a pipeline that runs from Wyburg on the Russian Baltic Sea coast all the way down to Germany. That's 1,230 kilometers. It builds on an existing pipeline, the Nord Stream 1, this is Nord Stream 2, and effectively doubles the capacity to supply the European Union. This is gas coming from Russia's gas fields, supplying the European Union. Part of the problem is that there is just so much of it that many people have raised eyebrows and said this is making the European Union dependent on Russian gas, which is dominated by Gazprom, a huge monopoly. 14 countries get 50% of their gas from Russia. Germany gets 40% of its gas from Russia. That makes this deal extremely important and has raised eyebrows, as I was suggesting, because there is this fear that Russia could use it for political purposes.
And Rob, just why has the United States decided to impose these sanctions?
Well, you know, it's partly geopolitics. The United States has been opposed to this deal for a long, long time. Really from the outset, was opposed to Nord Stream 1 as well. The argument is the one that just been discussing, really, that there is a fear that the European Union is making itself far too dependent on one supplier. Now, over the last few years, there is no doubt that the European Union has tried to diversify its supplies, but you know, the simple truth of the matter is it does get an enormous amount of its gas from Russia. It's cheap, and at a time when the European Union is trying to break away from dependence on other sources of energy, like nuclear, for instance, and coal, it's an attractive source. So it's very hard for the Europeans to resist the temptation. But for the Americans, well, it's almost ironic, though, isn't it? You know, the Americans are presenting themselves in this sort of deal as the defenders of Ukraine, because the pipeline that before Nord Stream supplied the European Union with most of its gas ran through Ukraine. There is still a pipeline, and you just referred to it in that introduction you gave there, that a deal has been signed between the Russians and Ukrainians to keep that pipeline open. But what the Ukrainians have been saying is that this is a tool, Nord Stream, that the Russians can always use to cut them off, to cut them out of the deal, and makes them much more vulnerable to the Russians as a consequence. So here we have the United States, which has been in pretty hot water over its position on Ukraine over the last few weeks or so, suddenly appearing as the defender of Ukrainian interests over this deal.